If we accept that higher education has a responsibility to guide students in the process of becoming adults, this responsibility must be expressed in actions in higher education. In this concluding video, I would like to offer 5 suggestions for concrete measures for how to develop higher education in this regard. First, higher education must create space for free and critical thought. As a first step in this process, higher education institutions must critically examine their own activities to see if structural barriers are being created for students to think freely within our higher education institutions. As we recall, this was something that Kant identified in his time, where he saw structural reasons why people was kept unenlightened, that is, immature. A concrete measure here could be to counteract the fact that teaching is reduced to a form of one-way communication where the educator acts as a sage from the stage and gives the students all the answers, a typical example of the learnification of education. Instead, teaching needs to be more focused on being exploratory, where students are invited to ask questions, test arguments, and critically review established knowledge, just to mention a few examples. Second, teaching should create space to, as Biesta would emphasize, interrupt the students. This can be done by allowing students to deal with controversial issues, ethical dilemmas, a diversity of perspectives, and various proposed solutions to real societal problems. The focus should accordingly be on creating situations, both eye-opening and sometimes uncomfortable situations, where the students has to stop and really make a choice. In this way, we offer them the opportunity to appear as subjects. Third, higher education should be willing to give students greater responsibility for their own education. As Kant emphasized, a person is kept immature by others thinking for them. Therefore, students must be given opportunities where they are encouraged to take responsibility for their own education. Thus, by giving students, for example, more opportunities to develop independent projects, allowing them to participate in decision-making processes, and by asking them to propose and possibly even carry out teaching elements, you force students out of their laziness and fear, as Kant described it, and encourage them to actively take responsibility. Fourth, higher education should encourage students to live as subjects in and for the world. As Biesta emphasizes, appearing as a subject is not just about pursuing personal desires, nor preserving or reinforcing existing beliefs and perspectives. Instead, it is about taking responsibility for being a subject of action that has an impact on the world. Higher education should therefore relate to and create networks with local actors that create these kinds of opportunities for them to act in the world. So that teaching is anchored in, for example, people's lived experience, their real societal challenges, the needs and demands of institutions and employers, and the work of marginalized actors and interest groups. In summary, making teaching for action, you could say. Finally, higher education should develop a culture that makes adulthood an important focus area and purpose in the long term. Here, it is about entering into dialogue with both employees and students in order to anchor a broader educational purpose in everyone. This will challenge the notion that higher education should only be concerned with learning. It will also create a foundation for being able to give higher education a unique place in relation to other levels of education, where potentially everyone can understand that what makes higher education higher is, among other things, that we guide students towards adulthood. So this list, it's not exhaustive in any way. I imagine more suggestions could be mentioned, and I welcome you to share them in the chat or during a session. But this list does offer some initial points of departure for higher education in developing into institutions that are capable of guiding their students, these emerging adults, into adulthood. In this lecture, I have argued that part of the answer to the question of what makes higher education higher is that we have a special responsibility to guide students into adulthood. This perspective is relevant to highlight as students enter higher education just when most of them are emerging into adulthood. But it is also an urgent issue due to the need to redefine higher education in light of the challenges that it is facing right now. Through the philosophical works of Immanuel, Kant, and Gert Biesta, I showed that the adulthood that is central to higher education does not only mean that students learn new knowledge, learnification of education then, but also that they develop a will and the courage to think for themselves, make decisions, and act in and for the world in a responsible way. Finally, I pointed out some examples of concrete measures that higher education should take in order to be able to guide students towards adulthood. So, I hope this lecture offered you some food for thought. Until next time, take care.